Now come to discuss the requirements validation process. Requirements validation concerned with demonstrating that the requirements define the system that the customer really wants. This means in this phase of requirement engineering, we will verify and validate. In simple, we will test the desired requirements from the customer, that either the collected requirement list that originated or that are discovered are correct or not, or accordingly to the design or not. Requirements error cost are very high, so validation is very important, and this point is very much important. Remember that if after development, after implementing all the requirements using some coding tool, if they are found some errors or faults during the testing phase, and the reason of errors are traced back to, for example, to the requirement engineering phase, especially the elicitation phase, then it become very much costly to fix that error. And sometimes the cost of fixing errors or correcting errors in a software is much higher than developing a software from the scratch. Thus, we need validation phase before implementation. Requirements validation, in short, is to validate either the user requirements and the system requirements are correct or not. So the base of requirements validation is the requirement specification document, system requirement specification document. Fixing a requirements error after a delivery may cost up to 100 times the cost of fixing an implementation error. Requirement checking. As in validation, we will check each and every requirement. So we will check the following during validation. First is validity. Means, does the system provide the functions which best support the customer need? So we will check first the validity of the functional requirement. Then comes consistency. Are there any requirements conflict? This means if there are conflicts of the two requirements, so this means there is no consistency in the requirements. And as we already discussed in the software requirement specification document, that the requirements writing should be such that the requirement should be consistent. The third criteria for validation is completeness, which means all the function required by the customer included, or anything miss. If anything miss, so we will go back to analysis and elicitation phase, and we will then discover or collect requirements again. Realism means, can the requirements be implemented given available budget and technology? As the budget plan, project plan is designed before requirement engineering mostly, or during the start of the elicitation phase, and budget, the calculated budget will be checked. If the requirements that should be implemented by the development team, and then we will see here that the whole cost map with the calculated cost and budget. If not, this means we will then negotiate it again. Verifiability, can the requirement be checked? If the requirement cannot be checked, so we will then explore the reason. Requirements validation techniques. 3 basic techniques are used. First is the requirement review, or we can say review process, which is a systematic manual analysis of requirements. Laterally in requirement engineering course, we will discuss in detail about the review types. We have the formal inspection method, where the members, mostly 7 members team, is comprised, and SRS documents and meeting documents are distributed among them before the meeting. They come with preparation, and then meeting is held for 3 to 5 hours. There is a moderator who control the meeting and a writer, and then they negotiate, and during negotiation they fix any error, or if there is another problem they discuss, and then after validation it come back to the illustration phase. So normally in a formal review process, if the errors or any problem, if there is less than 5 or 5%, so it then become accepted, because we cannot say that we will produce an ideal document or specification document. One another review method is informal review or walkthrough, where no formal meeting is called, but randomly the documents are distributed and then reviewed. Prototyping is another validation method, using an executable model of the system to check requirements. Here we mostly use the dynamic prototypes, which look like the actual software but is not the actual, while in static, where we cannot do the dynamic activities, can also be used. We cannot say only dynamic, but static prototypes can also be used. And the third way is test case generation, which is developing test for requirement to check testability. The actual tests will be during or after development, but test cases will be designed before implementation. And the steps of test cases include test ID, test module, type of test, expected outcome, test components, etc. And then test will be conducted against these test cases. Requirement reviews, regular reviews should be held while the requirements definition is being formulated. Both client and contractor staff should be involved in reviews. Remember this point. Reviews may be formal with completed documents, or informal, or we can say a walkthrough. Good communication between developers, customer and users can resolve problem at an early stage. Review checks. There will be a checking document, or we can say a checklist document will be given, and these things will be included. Verifiability, is the requirement realistically testable or not? So check will be marked accordingly. Comprehensibility, is the requirement properly understood? Traceability, is the origin of requirement clearly stated? Adaptability, can the requirements be changed without a large impact on other requirements? Traceability, remember traceability is a very much important, because the requirements are not independent, isolated, but are linked to each other. So in traceability, we will check the link of requirements to other requirements, the link of functional requirement to user requirement, business requirements, the link of test cases to requirements, and so on. So we will check all of these, because laterally after the requirement engineering then comes designing phase, and for designing phase traceability, adaptability are very much important. Without traceability, we cannot finalize the software architecture and then the design. So for design we must need a strong requirement analysis and the dynamic behavior of requirements. So that was all about the review process and software requirements verification and validation.